dare to look into a world where you are vulnerable, smile, while the clueless glass shows what it sees, never knowing the beauty that lies beneath.
Okay, for the next 10 minutes, we're all going to be microsurgeons. We came into this beautiful auditorium as students and teachers and parents and guests, but we're going to suspend reality and we're going to be microsurgeons. Now, that doesn't mean that we're tiny surgeons. It means that the structures that we operate on are tiny. They can be as small as 0.5 millimeter. So to give you context of what that means, a pencil point is 1 millimeter. So you are operating on structures that are half the size of a pencil point. So you are amazing surgeons. Now you can't see that with your naked eye. The human eye just has its limitations. So you use tools to be able to see. And the tools that you use, your workhorse is the operative microscope. So just like in this picture, where you see a primary surgeon and an assisting surgeon looking through a microscope, which is made of lenses and light to magnify that you can actually see that structure, you can see them looking at a patient's eye. But there's many different types of surgeons that work and look through an operative microscope, because you literally have these tiny structures from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes. But we are all plastic and reconstructive surgeons because they focus on these very, very tiny vessels. So knowing that you are looking through an operative microscope, I wanted to give you a little context of what a surgical day would look like for you. You'd start very, very early in the morning, probably around 7 o'clock. And you would literally be operating until after dinner time. Your case might end at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. That's pretty typical. And the operative microscope comes in towards the end, and it's the most intense period of the procedure where you're doing the most complex procedures, and you have to hold your head very still, and you're using special instruments that have teeny tiny tips, and you're working precisely. The kind of procedures that you're doing, you're working on babies who might have congenital defects like a cleft palate. You're working on patients who might have had tissue removed due to cancer, and you're reconstructing that body. Or you might be working with a patient who's been in an accident, like a car accident, and things need to be put back together. So you are really intense microsurgeons. Now, before we talk about how this problem is being solved with regards to the ergonomics that you deal with in your daily surgical procedures, we're going to jump backwards really quickly and look at what brought us to this point, because we are literally standing on the shoulders of visionary surgeons. So it starts in 1860, so 162 years ago. The development of the loupes. So the loupes are basically glasses that have a small magnifying lens attached to it, and they allow you to see a little bit better than your eye. And you use them throughout your procedures still to this day. Next was a development that led to how we actually sew our vessels together. It was a French surgeon, Dr. Carrel, and he invented this technique that won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1912. And then was the first operative microscope. This was in 1920, it was the Karolinska School in Stockholm, and they utilized it and saw these tiny structures for the first time. And then you fast forward 40 years, and in 1960s, that's when the first microscopes were being used basically all the time, and they had specialized these instruments to be able to work with this delicate tissue, and you had very fine suture that you could sew the vessels together. So this is where the story gets really interesting, because this is where the firsts started to happen. So right then in the 1960s is the first thumb replantation, putting the thumb back in place, the first arm replantation, and the first artery repair in a finger. Then we started looking at tissue. So utilizing tissue to do reconstruction. So now we're starting to use scalp, groin, omentum, and then the following decade, we're doing even more advanced tissue. For instance, this, which we speak to in its abbreviated form as a deep flap. It's where you harvest part of the belly and you move that tissue to other parts of the body. Commonly these days, we're using it for reconstruction after a mastectomy. Now, in the 1990s, we have the first tongue replantation and the first hand allotransplantation. That means that you are taking donor tissue or organs and putting it on another body. And then in 2005, you have the first face allotransplantation taking place in France by a group of French surgeons. So in a very, very short period of time, 1960s to current day, we went from the start of microsurgery to a face transplant. So you can only imagine that with new, more advanced tools, where this can go. And this is where technology and medicine have met. So this image is of a digital surgical microscope. As you can see, the surgeon is not attached to the operative microscope. They are, in this view, looking at a monitor, and they're wearing passive polarized glasses. So that same view that they would have had to stand very still for to be able to see is now displayed on a monitor in front of them. And they can see it in 3D. And because it's digitized, that information that's collected is much more than what they saw through the ocular microscope. It's a bigger field of view, and it's a greater depth of field. And then by freeing the surgeon from the microscope, you actually have the ability for the microscope to be able to bend and see those structures that you haven't been able to see from those angles before by using a foot pedal. So you can actually manipulate the view, because before your body would have had to bend and hold for those positions for hours at a time. So with this technology in your hands, you can actually now do procedures that were never even thought of before. And as you add layers, because it's a digital format, so now you can add augmented reality, and you can display this in an AR headset, you can display it in a virtual reality headset, you can layer on information on top of the surgical view. And just like in your cars, when you're driving and you have guidance systems that might make a sound or might put up an image, you have that same image now in surgery, so that even before you see the structure, the system can tell you, watch out. Now we combine that with robotics. So the system, the camera's held on a robotic arm, but now we have tools that are also separating the patient from the surgeon with a robot in between. So in this video, you'll see the digital image displayed on the monitor, just like we saw a minute ago, and then two robotic arms that are actually mimicking the surgeon's movement of their hands. And they're scaling that movement down so the surgeon can sit comfortably away from the patient in a chair, looking at the monitor, and their movement is scaled down up to 20 times. And it takes out basically all tremor. So as you can see, that this technology is really moving our profession ahead significantly. So we're kind of nearing the end of our 10 minutes. We have to go back to reality, and we're once again students and teachers and parents and guests. But for the students among us, if you enjoyed being a microsurgeon for the last 10 minutes, please consider pursuing that profession, because what you'll be able to do with these tools will be mind-blowing, and we look forward to your firsts. In closing, I also want to thank the microsurgeons globally who have dedicated their professional career in the service of others. Thank you.